Welcome to the McFeely Mess podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
All right, welcome to the McFeely Mess podcast at Inforum.com. And we need to go down a road today that I'm honestly not all that comfortable going down because I do not gamble. I never have. It's not my thing. But it's obviously incredibly popular, and sports betting is, with all its warts and all, it's incredibly popular as well. And as North Dakota State has moved into the FBS and the Mountain West Conference, one thing that I've noticed with all the other stuff going on with the college football 27, NDSU getting into that, and national prognosticators picking them to be the college football playoff representative this year from the G6, Brett McMurphy. Good luck with that. And all this other stuff that's kind of come down the pike. There's more betting, gambling, Las Vegas stuff type going on around North Dakota State as well, because they're now part of the 138 team FBS. And if you read my column at Inforum the other day, you saw that my lead-in to my Mountain West prediction column, the column in which I predicted the order of finish in the Mountain West, led with the fact that North Dakota State, according to BetMGM, which is one of the big gambling bookmakers, big gambling houses, I believe it's based in Las Vegas. We can ask our guest that. But that bookmaker set NDSU's win total at 9.5, which means that if you're going to bet the over-under, and again, this is my betting gambling vernacular is extremely limited, so pardon me if I'm getting this wrong, and my guest can correct me. But if you're betting the over-under, that means that if you took the over, if you put money on North Dakota State to win more games than what BetMGM thinks they'll win, or at least set the line at what they'll win, NDSU would have to go 10-2 for you to collect. The under, if you bet the under, they could win 9 games and still not hit the over-under. So, I mean, my point is that's a really high number. And in fact, it's the highest of all G6 football teams in the United States of America. And I thought, as I looked at this, and since I don't know anything about gambling, I thought I need to talk to somebody who knows about this. And it just so happens that the gentleman who wrote the article at the BetMGM.com website is a guy named Chase Kiddy. You may not recognize the name. I do, because Chase and I don't know that we're friends, but we certainly know each other because back in the day when James Madison and North Dakota State were butting heads in the FCS for supremacy, Chase was a JMU guy, and he and I would exchange things on Twitter. And it wasn't negative. It wasn't like, screw you. It was just banter back and forth. But Chase Kiddy is a JMU guy, and he is now I'll call him a betting analyst for BetMGM, and we're going to turn to him today after this incredibly long introduction to talk to us about this wacky 9.5 over-under win total for North Dakota State. Hello, Chase Kiddy. Have you fallen asleep yet, or have you hung in there with me through that 7-minute introduction?
I'm here. Great setting the table. Great setting the table, Mike. You come off very natural for somebody that purports to have no gambling knowledge. It's great to be with you. It's great to talk North Dakota State football and win totals and betting and all of the things that become a little more accessible once you're an FBS program.
So we need to be upfront. I did text you and chat with you briefly the other day before I published my column because I wanted to make sure that I had some of the vernacular correct, so I didn't look like a complete idiot. And so you did help me. But our conversation, I don't want to say off the record, but our kind of our background conversation we had fascinated me because I asked you, frankly, like, what the hell is going on with a 9.5 win total from BetMGM for NDSU? And your explanation was extremely interesting. So I'm going to ask you now, with the microphones on and the recorder going, what the hell is with a 9.5 win total for NDSU in their first year in FBS? That seems really, really high to me.
It's a little high. I was also surprised when I saw it. Maybe not as surprised as you, but I think there's a couple things going on here. So number one, I think in terms of marketing campaigns, public success, there are very few programs, there are very few names in college sports that have the veneer of success like North Dakota State football does. So I think there's a lot of respect in the market, in the betting market, for what the program does. I think if you go back and look at the last 5 years, there's also, historically there's this idea that you don't come up from FCS and compete right away. I think the last 5 years have nuked that idea from orbit. And JMU gets some credit for this, but it's not just JMU. Jacksonville State came up and was very competitive in Conference USA right away. They won a conference championship. Sam Houston had a couple good years there before Keeler left. So the idea that you can come up and compete right away in some of these conferences that look a whole lot like the FCS playoffs did 10, 15, 20 years ago, because of how many teams have moved up, it's just not, the market just doesn't think it's that hard anymore. And so I think when you blend those ideas together, the fact that transitioning up is easier for top FCS programs and how much respect there is for North Dakota State, and the fact that the Mountain West has bled its best programs now to the Pac-12, everything kind of profiles together as North Dakota State can come into the Mountain West right away and be really good. So that is, I think, the ground on which that 9.5 sits. I think, interestingly, and I'll pause here and you can sort of interject whatever you want, but I think the more interesting part isn't the historic transition in Fargo up to FBS. It's actually the nuts and bolts of the 2026 schedule, and that more so than the transition is maybe the cause for looking at the 9.5 number critically.
So what does that mean, the nuts and bolts of the 2026 schedule? And I'll interject this, is prognosticators like Phil Steele and others, and pardon me, listeners, and maybe even Chase if I'm dropping some names and some publications that you don't know about, but I've been consuming and gobbling up everything about this move since I was touting NDSU to move for about 6 years. I figure I better keep up to date on what's going on. But Phil Steele, I think he lists NDSU's schedule as like the third or fourth easiest in all of FBS. And that's based on 2025 success, 2025 production, blah, 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 blah. And so, I guess I get that part of it, that their schedule is not great in their first year, but is that what you're talking about when you're talking about the 2026 schedule?
I think it's true that they're non-conference. I guess I would disagree with that premise a little bit. And I like Phil's product. I know Phil. I interview him every year. So like, he's a guy whose product I really respect. I'm looking at his magazine right now as we speak. The non-conference schedule, I think, for North Dakota State is pretty manageable. And a lot of times when you look at these teams that move up and they have to put together an FBS schedule on the fly, sometimes they're playing total like bottom of the barrel teams because that's all you can get, and sometimes they're playing total outmatched power conference schools because that's all they could get. They could get a bye game, or they could get a bye game in the other direction. And North Dakota State's is kind of, I don't want to say in the middle, but it's neither of those extremes.
Right. They do not have an FBS. They don't have a Power 4 game. I have to watch my language here because they're no longer an FCS. They don't have a Power 4 game this year. And they do have a really, really bad FCS program that they got at the last minute when they put their schedule together in like 3 weeks. So yes, their other two non-conference games, or three non-conference games, are, I got to think here. Jacksonville State, Sacramento State, Fordham, and then San Jose State, which is a Mountain West team, but it's being played as a non-conference game.
Yeah, and like I don't see a lot of San Jose maybe could be interesting. I don't know. I don't see a lot of challenge in the September portion of that at Sacramento State. I mean, everything I've read about Sacramento State this year is like it's going to be a much harder transition maybe than what we see in Fargo. Jacksonville State, I think that could be a competitive game.
I think that's going to be an interesting game, frankly. I do. So.
But North Dakota State's 8.5-point favorite, so the market says like competitive, but Bison should win. I think more so where my questions are is the Mountain West schedule that they've been dealt, which it's always really hard in this age of transfer portal to know exactly what teams are going to look like before you get to watch them play. So I rely more on conference futures odds than I used to. I used to get really in the nitty-gritty of the roster. I think it's just harder to do that now. But if you look at the road games that North Dakota State is supposed to play this year, in conference, at UNLV, at New Mexico, at Hawaii, at Air Force, that's basically the top of the conference that's left. So if you have to play, like let's say there's a group of 5 teams at the top of this conference that North Dakota State's in, and you've got to play the other 4 all on the road, it is hard to imagine a scenario where in your first year as an FBS team and whatever roster bleed you're trying to deal with and what you're trying to learn about 85 scholarships and the new stamina it takes to make it through an FBS schedule, and all your conference opponents are new, like all of these inherent challenges, and also all of your top competitors in the conference are road games. It's hard for me to imagine a 10-2 in that scenario. So that's what I mean when I say it's the nuts and bolts of the schedule.
Gotcha.
It's less for me. I actually really trust them that they've got the FBS thing figured out. They, like JMU, took their time with it, probably made the decision a year or two too late instead of a year or two too early. And I think what we've seen in Harrisonburg with that is it really prepares you to come up and compete right away. So I don't actually have a lot of concerns about the transition. It's the schedule that they were dealt for me is the cause for like a more of a lukewarm approach to what the season might be.
And that's in line with my thinking as well, is that I have no doubt that North Dakota State will be successful in the Mountain West, especially in 2 years. I think they're going to be a wagon, as they say, in the Mountain West in a couple of years, in part because of their tradition, their history, but in part because of the style of football that they play compared to the rest of the Mountain West. So, but be that as it may, I've said an 8-4 year, in my opinion, would be an excellent start for North Dakota State this year because of the schedule, because of the travel, because of the fact that they're not taking a transition year. They're going right from FCS to FBS in the span of about 8 months, and they really haven't had time to build the roster the way that it needs to be built. And so I don't mean to, I said this for years, that schools like JMU and North Dakota State and Montana State and South Dakota State, they're, even when they were in FCS, they were basically operating as high G6 schools already, just with maybe the budgets weren't where they needed to be, but the talent and the want to on the football field surely were where they need to be. But the fact is NDSU is operating basically with a 63 scholarship roster right now because they haven't had time to build the roster. They're adding guys. They're getting guys out of the portal at certain positions because they know they need help. But they're basically an FCS team with the short roster, in my opinion. And I think at some point, unless it's just a miracle season of no injuries, I think that's going to catch up to them at some point during the season. That maybe into November, you start to go, wow, they're getting kind of worn down here. They're getting kind of beat up because they've been flying to Hawaii and they've lost a couple of guys and all these other factors. Combine that with the idea, and I've said this publicly before in Fargo, so I'm not breaking any news here, but I don't know that this is a great NDSU team. I just don't. There's too many questions for me to go, wow, these guys are going to be really, really good. They'll be just fine. I think 8-4 is easily within reach if they stay relatively healthy, but I don't know that it's a 2019 NDSU team or a 2013 NDSU team or a 2018 NDSU team where there was just, other than James Madison, nobody else was going to beat those NDSU teams. Nobody else was close to those two teams those years. And so that's kind of where I'm at, where I look at the 9.5 and go, man, if I was a gambler, if I had money to do this, I would take the under all day long on NDSU.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. I'll reinforce one point you made, and then I kind of want to talk about the math of the odds, which is really interesting, specifically for North Dakota State. When I watched JMU transition its first year in 2022, it did pretty much what North Dakota State's doing. Because the Sun Belt was also going through a period of transition and adding teams to its conference, JMU came in and right away, year one, played this full FBS schedule that's kind of unusual when you watch teams transition. And one of the things that you saw in that year, if I'm remembering right, they went 8-4. I think it might 8-4, 9-3. One of the things you saw once you got into the latter half of October and November is it was just the depth. It was exactly what you were talking about. It's certain positions until you're an FBS program. It's hard to understand what FBS depth looks like at tackle. Quarterback depth was an issue because QB1, even a top flight FCS school, pretty good. You lose a week or two at QB1 and you got to go to that backup quarterback and you're basically still an FCS program. It's a little rough. JMU had a quarterback injury, I believe missed 2 weeks, and the 2 games they missed where it was a key conference game against Marshall, and then they stepped out of conference in the middle of October and played Louisville. And it was a disaster. It looked like a mid-table FCS team because that's basically the quarterback play it was getting for those 2 weeks. Tackle, and then, certain defensive positions like who you're rotating in off the edge at third down if your guy needs a breather. It's just different. So I would look as the season goes on in Fargo, I'd kind of look at some of those positions because that's probably going to be the building block as the program gets into the latter half of this decade. I think that's where you're going to start to see better FBS depth in year 2, year 3, year 4.
So, I need to backtrack. I should have asked you this right off the bat, but just to be clear, you are not setting the lines. That is not your job. You are a writer, an analyst for BetMGM, but you are not setting the lines and the numbers. Who does that? Is it it's not you, but who is it?
That is a question I get sometimes. No, I am a mere blog boy. Long-time FCS people, which there are a lot of them in North Dakota, I know, might remember I used to host the Hero Sports podcast with Brian and Sam like many, many years ago. So that's my lane. I don't set lines. I'm a journalist turned blog boy for the sports book. That's really all I do. Who does set the lines? We have a team of traders that's basically their job. Is they analyze the market, they come up with a number. A lot of times looking at that number involves also looking at what your competitors are doing from the sportsbook's perspective. Their competitors are other sportsbooks. And in the U.S. market, sometimes you have other legal app operators, like a competitor to BetMGM would be DraftKings or FanDuel. But you also have the Las Vegas competitors, so South Point, Circa, places like that. BetMGM as a business is actually based in New Jersey. It's based in Jersey City.
Oh, okay.
So there are you're looking at what the market as a whole is doing, and you're also looking at the action you're taking, and you're sort of managing that liability, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a business. Money comes in, money goes back out to winners. So you're trying to manage that liability from the money you're taking from all of your users, all your players.
Okay. We got that cleared up. So you wanted to touch on, was it the math of I can't remember how you phrased it. You wanted to touch on something else.
The odds of the math. So when you look at win total markets, this is for people that are brand new to win total betting specifically. It's not like betting a point spread on Saturday where you bet $100 and you win back pretty close to $100. When you bet into futures markets, you get totally different odds, totally different payouts. And a lot of times when you're betting a win total, an over-under win total, there is one side where you're going to be sort of getting you're getting good odds for a less likely result. And there's going to be another side where you're getting a lesser payout for a result the market sees as more likely. So here, North Dakota State 9.5 at BetMGM, the odds are minus 235 if you want to play the under, and they're plus 175 if you want to play the over. That means you're going to take a pretty reduced payout relative to your principal that you stake. If you bet the under, you're going to get a really nice payout if you bet the over. That's common. What's less common is to see how big those numbers are. Minus 235 and plus 175. That's pretty big for a win total. And it was just interesting to me to see that the market is that far out on that 9.5 number. You're getting great odds to bet a 10-2 season for North Dakota State. Like really, really good. If you bet, you're almost getting 2-1 on your money, which is pretty close to unheard of in a win total market like this. But it's interesting how hard they are incentivizing the over and how hard they are disincentivizing the under instead of just moving the number to 9 and having more equal odds for both sides of that market. So
let me, and you helped me out with this the other day as well. But okay, so on the win total market, as you say, if you bet the under, the number on the BetMGM website, as you said, says minus 235. So that, as you explained it to me, just using round numbers, you have, let's see, you explain it. Because it matters in terms of just base it on a $100 bet just to keep round numbers. So it's if Mike McFeely in Fargo says, "Wow, I'm going to," I don't think NDSU is going to get to 9.5 wins this year, or 10 wins rather. I'm going to take the under. What does the minus 235 number mean in money terms or in betting terms or in real terms?
Right. It means you'd have to bet $235 to win $100 of winnings, right? On a winning bet, you would get your money back that you wagered, right? Think of it as going into escrow, and it sort of holds there until the bet is resolved. You get that money back if you win, and then you would get an additional $100 of winnings. So if you're like an investor, or you're thinking about this from like a financial standpoint, risking $235 to get $100 of winnings back is kind of a tough bet, right? You would like to get a little more return for what you're risking on that. To put it in smaller stakes, because not everybody has $250 lying around to bet on something like this. Say you bet $20, you would receive back $8.51. Right, so that's sort of the ratio that you're playing at.
So that puts it in much more real terms. I mean, the 235 and 100 makes sense because they're round numbers. But so if I bet $20 and NDSU wins 8 games, I only win $8 on those $20.
Correct, and that's how hot. That's some of the terminology could be kind of confusing, but like that's how short those odds are. That you're getting back less than half of what you are risking.
Okay.
So it's seen as something that's very likely to happen. And a lot of times when you have odds that are that far out, that are that short, instead of continuing to move the odds, you would move the win total that you're betting against. But the problem there is if you move something like 9.5 down to 9, now you're on an even number. And you've already probably taken some money on 9.5. You might have a situation where you've got to pay out your 9.5s, but you push on your 9s. So, from a liability management standpoint, you're not actually making any money. You're you're just losing money at that point, right?
Sure,
Because you got to pay out all the 9.5s, and then all the 9s get their money back.
Because if I bet at 9.5 today, I'm locked in at that number. That's not
correct.
The house cannot change that on me. I'm locked in at 9.5.
Correct.
Okay.
It's horse race. Sometimes people think the way horse racing works is how all sports betting works. Horse racing works on something called parimutuel odds, where it's the odds don't lock for you. Like, you can bet it early, but the odds are going to move all the way until post time, right? Pretty much every other flavor of sports betting, when you bet it, that's the odds you have. It's printed on the ticket. You get to hold that ticket. If the odds change 17 times later, it doesn't matter. You got it at that number. And so that's why a lot of times when you'll talk to sports bettors, one of the pieces of advice you'll sometimes get is bet early. Right? You can often find a great advantage in betting a market early, because that idea of market efficiency, that lots of people betting into a market will make it more efficient. It provides signals to the book on where the market should go. That efficiency hasn't had the time to take hold yet. So you can get a really great number relative to where the market closes.
Okay.
If you imagine, like, all these people come in and they bet win totals over the next 45 days, all the way up until week 1. Let's say something crazy. I mean, this won't happen, but let's say the market moves on North Dakota State all the way to 7. Well, you're sitting here with a 9.5 under. You probably feel pretty good.
Right.
So that's the advantage of betting early.
Okay, I got you. But these numbers are interesting, and I mean, it's, as you said, the under odds. As I'm looking at the website here, the closest under odds to 235 are Georgia State and Southern Miss. Their win total is 4.5, and they're at minus 200 on the under. So that, I mean, the 235 is way out in outer space for North Dakota State on the under odds. It's interesting.
In my experience, once you start to see numbers around 175, 180, 190, that's a lot of times where you'll start to see win totals move up or move down instead of the odds moving even further out. So yeah, like you said, and like I said, a minus 235 is pretty unusual.
So this is this isn't why we're talking here, but I'm scrolling through these numbers, and San Jose State in the Mountain West is generally seen as one of the dregs of the Mountain West. And most prognostications that I've seen have them finishing in the bottom 3 or 4 of the league. Their win total, and I haven't looked closely at their schedule, but their win total is 7.5. And that's the same as New Mexico and the same as Hawaii. So that's interesting to me. And again, it might be schedule based, like I said, but and Air Force is 6.5, and we think Air Force is going to be one of those better top 4 or 5 teams in the league. So that's
yeah. It almost always G6 win totals is a very specific market. It's heavily schedule influenced. So if you pull up San Jose State's schedule, you'll see right out of the gate they open at USC, and a lot of times when you see win totals like that, it's totally based on who they get. So San Jose State not expected to be good, but 6.5 because after they play USC. It's Eastern Michigan, it's Cal Poly, it's Fresno, and it kind of softens up.
okay.
And so they can probably get around that 6-6 mark. But even still, I mean, 7.5
is
pretty high.
Yeah, it is. Okay. But again,
so there you go. You found a bet you like.
Well, but again, though, as we talked about earlier, their last game of the year is North Dakota State, and that's on Thanksgiving weekend. And maybe by that time, North Dakota State is missing 6 starters, or what? Whatever, 5 starters, and they're worn out. And so maybe that game looks a whole lot different on November 21st or whatever it is than it does on July 9th. So it's interesting stuff. So, Chase, I told you a half hour. And my little clock here on my podcast machine says 29 minutes and 30 seconds. So we're going to cut it off there. That was fantastic. I really appreciate that. Like I said, I'm a betting novice or idiot, and all of this is fascinating to me. And you did a great job of explaining what's going on here with the with the 9.5 with NDSU. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Not a problem. Anytime. Happy to help always.
I will be getting back to you, I'm sure, during the season and maybe before that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Chase Kiddy, BetMGM. You can check it out. I'll link it in the podcast as well with the copy that I'm going to put up with this. Then you can check out those win totals and Chase's article for yourself. Got to roll. This is the McFeely Mess Podcast, inforum.com.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess Podcast at inforum.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inforum.com and search Mike McFeely